You're listening to Nightlight Radio Network. This is Dr. Bob Hieronimus, co-host of 21st Century Radio. We are happy to present this rebroadcast of our show on Nightlight. Hey, we got rules and regulations. Yes, we call them R&R, Rules and Regulations on 21st Century Radio. So sit up straight, make sure your tie is straight, shine your shoes, and I'm certain all of you have a good haircut by now. Here's the 3 rules and regulations. Humans are not machines. They have an immortal component. 2, we are not alone in the universe, and we never have been. 3, what we do to the planet, we do to ourselves. Now, I do realize how radical these rules and regulations are, but, you know, that's life. Things get kind of radical at times. Well, tonight's book is Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension, published by my publisher, Inner Traditions International, by Dr. Marc Seifer, Ph.D., with a foreword by my doctoral thesis dude, Dr. Stanley Krippner, Uncle Stan, as we know them. And the space-time continuum of scientists generally ignores the realm of the mind, though phenomena such as imaginary numbers used by Einstein to combine space with time are concepts that only exist in the mind. Dr. Marc Seifer contends that the inadequacy of 4-dimensional models to account for our experience of mental phenomena points to the consciousness of the mind as a higher organizing principle, a 5th dimension where thoughts are as real and quantifiable as our familiar physical world. He shows that because thought enables us to move backward and forward through time, reflecting on the past and making plans for the future, that this 5th dimension of mind breaks the laws. It's a mind breaker. It doesn't break our laws, but I guess it breaks other people's laws. Breaks the laws of relativity, thereby transcending the speed of light. His extensive study of this 5th dimension ranges from relativity and the ether theory to precognition, telepathy, and synchronicity, all from the perspective of the conscious universe. Dr. Marc Seifer, Ph.D., teaches psychology at Roger Williams University. He has studied under Bruno Bettelheim, my goodness gracious, Herbert Meltzer, and Dr. Stanley Krippner, and is the author of several books, including Inward Journey from Freud to Gurdjieff, and the acclaimed Wizard, The Life and Times of Nikola Tesla, and he lives in the wonderful state of Rhode Island. And by the way, Dr. Seifer joined Zohara Hieronimus over a decade ago on the bestest, as we say in Balmer, the bestest book ever published on one of our heroes, Nikola Tesla, Wizard, The Life and Times of Nikola Tesla. Welcome to 21st Century Radio. How are you, Mark?
Good. How are you doing, Bob?
Well, about a B+. And, we'll get, life gets tough every now and then. By the way, perhaps you can answer this question I've asked 100 times, and I've forgotten who it is. Who of the Greek philosophers said, all things are vibrations?
You know, one of them that said that was Hobbes. There's nothing but matter and motion. And I thought that was a brilliant statement by Hobbes, and I think it's about the 1500s.
Well,
so he's reducing everything down to matter and motion.
Mm-hmm. But you can't recall a Greek philosopher. I don't think it was Anaximander or Anaximenes or Heraclitus or whatever. I just can't recall who that dude was.
Pythagoras?
Could be. Of course, I think he also said all things are numbers. Now, you note that this book is the record of a quest that began in the early 70s and yet is not over. What's this quest?
I really want to know what consciousness is and also what higher consciousness is. I think one of the problems that I found with mainstream psychology is that a lot of it, I think it's actually boring. I mean, I've read tons of psych journals, and a lot of it is not set up how to reach a higher state of consciousness. Even Freud stuff. I mean, I have a book that goes into tremendous depth on Freud, but he tells you how to find more and more about yourself, but not how to live a more productive life, I don't think. I mean, Woody Allen's been in analysis forever. You know, it's that idea. So that led me to Gurdjieff's thinking, and I think Gurdjieff actually he's very practical and pragmatic. He really links higher states of consciousness to creative doing, just going out and do your own thing. That the very act of doing something, working, part of the work, that's a way to achieve higher consciousness. and also the simple idea to be master of your own ship. One thing I've never understood is why people smoke cigarettes and why they can't quit. I mean, I know I have habits that I wish I could stop too, but I mean, I'd like to believe that I could be in control of my life, and I think all of that is linked. So the quest really is to figure out what is consciousness, and at the same time, what is the high state, and what are the higher states of consciousness.
Now, you mentioned Gurdjieff, and of course, on page 26, you say something I think is enormously important today. You say, why do you believe the new generation is being robbed?
Well, I think there I'm talking about the bookstores.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, most of, especially in the New Age bookstores. But why do you believe that the readers are being robbed?
Well, I'm a kid of the late '60s, the early '70s. I'm about 5 years younger than you. Were born in 1948. And when I was a kid, right out of school, you could go into a bookstore and you could roam the bookstore and you could find books on Lapsang Rampa or Gurdjieff or Wilhelm Reich or Ouspensky. You can't do that now. As giant as Barnes & Noble and Borders are, they really don't have a lot of stuff. And it's amazing. I know a few authors, some of my favorite authors, you can't find them in the bookstores. And I think it's unbelievable. At the same time, have you ever seen a decent book on astrology in a bookstore?
Oh, not since Dane Rudger stopped publishing, no.
Yeah. I mean, it's been 20, 30 years. All they have is junk in there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, really terrible. I'll tell you, symptomatic of this is a story about with my wife just the other day. She was making a pie, and she had a mixer. She wasn't happy with the mixer. She was going to get a Cuisinart mixer because it had 5 speeds, and she needed the low speed. So we put it on low, and it zipped around at 5 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and spit pie stuff all over the room. Cuisinart doesn't have a slow speed on their mixers. Something's changed in our society. It's a 5-speed mixer. We've lost a lot. We think that we're advancing, but in many ways we've become a lot more conservative, a lot less bold. And I think that I love bookstores. I love to roam in bookstores, but there's so many things that you can't find a decent book on Gurdjieff. You can't find a decent book on parapsychology. J.B. Ryan, I heard you mentioned Ryan's daughter. When we were, younger, you remember Edgar Mitchell and John White had that great book, Psychic Exploration.
Oh, yeah.
That should still be in print. I mean, that's, a biography of Truman, Be There Forever, or John Adams, but why not Psychic Explorations, which is an amazing book, which really every young person should be able to read a book like that.
I agree with you. There is so much just plain crap out there, and that's one of the important things about your work. You reintroduce a number of these individuals to us, which we'll touch on a little later on. Now, but how did you get interested in parapsychology?
Kicking and screaming. I was at the University of Chicago, and as you mentioned, one of my teachers, maybe the best teacher I ever had, was Bruno Bettelheim, and he really got me into Freud. And I got a book, a 1,000-page book on Freud, his collected works. I mean, he's written more than that, but this was a compact collected works, and I really studied it, and I was very intrigued. They talk about Freud and sex, but really, I could talk for an hour about Freud and never mention sex. I mean, he really discusses the depths of the unconscious, and he really explains the mechanism of how it works. And that got me into Carl Jung. I knew very little about Carl Jung in those days. This was around 1972, 73, and I audited a course on Carl Jung, and I was astounded at the idea of the collective unconscious. And that brought me to Frederick Myers. He wrote a book, Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death. That's the title of the book. Yep. And he talks about the universal mind. Now, he was talking about the universal mind in 1901. If you read Carl Jung's autobiography, he doesn't come up with the collective unconscious till about 1915. He has inklings around 1909. But there was a tons of stuff on the universal mind or the collective unconscious before Carl Jung. And when you really get into it, the idea basically is that a deeper level of vibration or frequency all minds are interconnected, all humans are interconnected, and even all animals and all of life. But and you can see it, telepathy between twins and that kind of thing. So what happened in about 1972, 73, I started to study J.B. Rhine stuff, and I realized that it has been proven that we have telepathic abilities. And I did these simple experiments with just, a deck of cards. You just have a friend, and you hold it up, and he just has to cast clubs, hearts, spades, and diamonds. And he starts getting 3, 4, 5 in a row, and you get the hair on your arms start to stand up because you're in sync, and you know what's happening. So what happened at that time, I really had my consensus reality shattered. I had a day in campus, in my room, where I really thought, in a sense, that I'd lost my mind because everything that I thought was true about the world was no longer true. I was learning that we do indeed have telepathic abilities. I was reading about the out-of-body experiences and serious experiments where they'd put a number high up on a high wall, and there's no way someone could peek because his head couldn't hit the wall, and he'd be able to tell you what was on the number. Ingo Swann was doing, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, and also a lot of stuff on life after death. There's a lot of evidence for life after death if you really want to study it. Mm-hmm. I would recommend the book by Rosemary Brown, Unfinished Symphonies, for starters. But that's what happened. I had a whole different view of what reality really was, and there was a moment there, the world that I thought was real was no longer real, and it was a scary moment. And I remember I was interviewing Andrija Puharic for a magazine article, and I asked him about that. I mean, he had very far-out life, and he basically said, don't feel the need to decide for sure that this is right and this is wrong. Allow for elements of ambiguity, tolerance for ambiguity, and he said life was a learning curve. And it removed a big weight from my mind because I didn't have to decide for sure that this had to be so and that had to be so. It was more just simply being open to all the possibilities of what we could do mentally. I mean, so that's really how the quest began. Then I came back to Rhode Island, and I taught a course on parapsychology, and I taught parapsychology for 15 years at Providence College, which really, got me deeply into that field.
When did Nikola Tesla enter your life?
He entered my life in 1976. I was working with a fellow by the name of Howard Smuckler.
Oh.
I was teaching a course on parapsychology, and he was teaching a course on UFOs here in Rhode Island and also at the New School. He was going back and forth. And one day he came back from New York, and he said, Mark, I am the editor now of 2 magazines, ESP Magazine and Ancient Astronauts. I said, how did you do it? He said, I walked into a bookstore, and I saw a book on French poodles. He said, I saw another book on rifles. I saw another book on motorcycles, and it was all done by Countrywide Publications. So he went and knocked on the guy's door, and the guy says, I don't care what you do. He said, you could do a book on doorknobs as long as you can sell 20,000 copies a month. So he said, can I do one on ESP and one on Ancient Astronauts? And so I was writing articles under like 5 different names because we were just getting started. And I was writing a bunch of books, and articles. And I was writing an article on Lapsang Rampa, who I had discovered a couple of years earlier. I just found one book. It was called The Third Eye, and it was a picture. The guy looked like Orson Welles with a glass eye in his forehead, and it turned out it was an autobiography of a Tibetan Lama. You don't find out until the 3rd book that he's a British guy and that he's, in a sense, dead and that a Tibetan Lama has taken over his body. He's written about 14 books, but I didn't know this. And so I was writing an article, and by this time I knew it, on Lapsang Rampa for Ancient Astronauts. And I came across a book which talked about avatars. And one theory about an avatar, which is an enlightened being, the theory is there's 5 of them on the planet at every time, on the Earth at any moment in time. I mean, it's just a theory. It's a nice theory, but I would say the Dalai Lama would certainly, be an enlightened being and would fit that bill. And so the book had a number of avatars. One was Lapsang Rampa, one was Jesus Christ, and another was this guy who came from the planet Venus, who landed on the Earth and gave us all these inventions, and his name was Tesla. I'd never heard the name before, and I thought, it was a great myth. And I was in the New York Public Library So I found out he actually did live, and he actually had patents in high-frequency currents. And that was it. I mean, once I found out this guy was real, I then made him the focus of my doctoral dissertation, and I wanted to find out how a guy so important could have been plucked from the history books so that we didn't know who he was. So that's really how it started.
Well, I'd like to ask you more about him. We'll return to him and later on in the hour. We're going to take our first break, Mark. The book is Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension. This show should be 6 hours to cover this work. This is an extraordinary book. It's published by Inner Traditions.
Hello, this is Ingo Swann, the author of Penetration, The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy. And you're listening to the wonderful 21st Century Radio with the amazing Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Our guest is Dr. Marc Seifer, Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension, Inner Traditions. Go to marcseifer.com, or you can actually click on the link on 21stcenturyradio.com. Mark, the anthropic principle refers to human beings and suggests that there is a link between the overall design of the universal and the human mind. What can you share with us about that link?
It's complicated. Part of it is that the universe had to expand at a particular rate. The matter to energy ratio was 1.37, which is it's called Sommerfeld's number, because 1.37 shows up in so many different ways. So the expansion rate of the universe is at a rate of 1.37, and also the mathematical probability that an electron would absorb a photon is 1.37. And they don't know why it's the same number for the structure of an atom and also the expansion rate of the universe. There's no physical reason that physicists can see why the two numbers should be linked, but obviously they are linked because it's the same number. So it's a coincidence. And had the expansion rate been slightly different, the argument is that life could not have evolved. At the same time, the universe is expanding and evolving in such a way that it ends up producing humans which are aware of the universe. So one aspect of the anthropic principle is that the universe has been set up so that entities would evolve which could observe the very process of the universe and be self-aware. And that's a lot of what it is. It's a cosmological coincidence is what it is.
Well, also on page 3, you note that in physics, you state that there are key numerical coincidences connecting the microcosmic world and the macrocosmic world, a mathematical link between certain ratios in both atomic and galactic structures. And you noted 1.37. Are there any other numbers similar to that, Mark?
Well, that's the main one that I discussed. Another number which is very important is the number 4, which is the tetragrammaton, or the fourfold nature of God. In Hebrew, YHVH is the name of God. It's 4 letters. But it's interesting, it has a repeating element, YHVH. So there's a link between Judaism and Christianity. YHV, you can see, is a triangle. And where would the H be, the fourth component? There's a fellow by the name of Mani Sadhu, and he wrote a book on the tarot. What he would do is he'd put a triangle with a dot in the center. So YHV would be Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and then the final H would be the dot in the center. In other words, Father, Son, Holy Ghost as a gestalt, as a totality, would be the fourth element. So 3, the Trinity, becomes 4, the tetragrammaton, or the fourfold nature of God. And then this is linked in Ezekiel. You have the 4 animals, which are lion, bear, eagle, and man. And if you combine those 4, in astrology, fire, earth, air, and water, you have the Sphinx. So the Sphinx is 5. So 4 plus 1 is 5. So lion, bear, eagle, and man, as a totality, as a gestalt, is number 5, the Sphinx, which is symbolized in our hand by the 4 fingers plus the thumb. So if you have 4 plus 1, the four fingers plus the thumb, but the 4 equals the 1 because the thumb is equivalent to all the 4 fingers. So every number is sacred, but I would say another major number would be 4, the fourfold nature of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in terms of synchronicity, could you define it for us, please?
Synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence, and I had an amazing one yesterday, and I'll just tell you about it because it's amazing. It really is amazing. I really didn't want to see The Dark Knight. I don't like all the horror and the madness of it all. But we have HBO, and it was on for the premiere was on last night, and so we watched it. Coincidentally, I have been working 10 years on a novel. I wrote a novel called Starrett's Encounter, which is kind of a takeoff on Uri Geller and the Russians and parapsychology. And I used the same characters, and it took me 10 years to complete this new novel, which is called Doppelganger, which is about a double, a guy who doesn't realize he has a twin out there. And there's a lot more to the story. But in any event, it took me 10 literal years to finish this book, and I literally went to Kinko's yesterday. And for the first time ever, I even told the girl there, I said, this is a 10-year process. I'm finally getting to see this whole thing at once. So I have the book yesterday, and we're watching The Dark Knight last night. So one of the bad guys in the movie The Dark Knight, his name is Maroni. My bad guy in my book, his name is Maroni.
Whoa.
And if you've seen the film, there's a whole thing with cell phones where he creates like an echo chamber. He's able to look into buildings and stuff. I use cell phones to create a similar kind of thing in my book. I mean, it was just, I used cell phones collectively to create a collective unit, and it was done in the movie, and the bad guy had the same name, so I'm going to change the name. Now, there's something in my book called the kicker. The kicker is an extra synchronicity. If you don't think this is a real synchronicity, here's one more, just, to really put it into perspective. The guy who made the movie, Christopher Nolan, made The Prestige, which is about Tesla. So the guy who makes this movie, the only guy who's ever made a movie about Tesla in modern times, like a major motion picture, is a guy, his next screenplay, I have the same name as the bad guy and another key component in there. And it just blew my mind last night. So there's synchronicity, simply a meaningful coincidence.
What do you think that might mean to this book that you've just written?
I think we're on a similar wavelength.
Like an idea whose time has come?
I think people are on similar. But I was negotiating with Nolan. I mean, he could have done the Tesla movie, or he could have made Prestige, and he went in the other direction. I never actually talked to him, but I talked to his people, and we had gotten a little bit, farther along the way on that. But I'm not sure the total meaning of it. I'll tell you another one, just to tell you how astounding it can be. This was a number of years ago. You can tell by the numbers. I went to a grocery store, and I bought butter, milk, and eggs, and it came to $2, right on the button. I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out a $2 bill I didn't know was in there. And the night before, I had dreamt about a $2 bill. Now, I don't know the whole meaning of this, but I'll tell you how I got the $2 bill. I had borrowed $3 from my girlfriend. She's now my wife, and we would pay each other back. It was no big deal. So she gave me a handful of bills, and I stuck it in my pocket. I wasn't going to count it out. So for fun, she had given me a $2 bill and a $1 bill. I hadn't even seen a $2 bill in a million years. So so I go into the grocery store. The bill came to exactly $2. I had dreamt about $2 bill the night before, and I reach into my pocket. I pull out a $2 bill. It just totally blew my mind. I don't know all the meaning to it, but I think one of the things that Carl Jung is trying to say is that the mental world, we see a connection to physical events. Like the China Syndrome and 3 Mile Island happened at the same time. Mm-hmm. We see the connection between these two events, and so it shows that the mental world has a fundamental reality that does interact with the physical world.
Well, if we had a couple more hours, we could cover a number of questions that you noted on telepathy, dream telepathy, examples of precognition, and the difference between prediction and precognition, etc. But I got to tell you, there is so much important information that none of the other guests that we've ever had on 21st Century Radio could handle the kind of questions that you can. And so I'm really taking advantage of that fact because of this book is an extraordinary book. One of the questions, obviously, we need to get to desperately is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Would you define that for us, please? What is consciousness?
I think consciousness is awareness. And there are different levels of awareness. And I remember as a kid playing with magnets. You played with magnets, right? You ever
sure.
bounce one magnet against the other, use the repelling force to push it against across the table. I used to try to make a pin stand up on its end because I found in the weight of the pin, if you could get the magnet right above it, it would start to hover a little bit. If you got a little bit too close, the pin would jump up, and if you could do it perfectly, you could get the pin to stand on its end. So as a kid, it always occurred to me that magnets have a certain form of basic awareness. Electrons don't like other electrons, and they like protons. That is really the basis of what I'm trying to say in this book. It's a very simple idea, and that is that consciousness is built into the structure of matter. The very fact that the periodic table of elements exists is proof that there's order to the universe. And the big question is, can you have order to the universe without some sentient entity ordering it? Every scientist secretly believes that there are laws to the universe, and the question is, can you have laws without a lawmaker? And I am arguing that you cannot have that. You must have a lawmaker. So essentially, I believe in a God, in some type of highly intelligent creative force who started all this. And if you start from that premise, you uncover all these amazing things. Pythagoras, which you mentioned before, saw the universe as built on numbers, harmony, music. And based upon that principle, Kepler discovered the planetary laws of motion, p squared over d cubed. The time it takes for a planet to circle the sun squared over the distance from the planet to the sun cubed is the same for every planet. So, for instance, the Earth, it takes 365 days squared over 93 million miles cubed. You'll come up with a ratio. That's the same for Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. It's the same thing. Now, the only way that they discovered that was their intrinsic belief that the universe was built on orderly principles. So what I'm trying to do is make a very strong case to explain how human consciousness could evolve, and it starts from the very premise that consciousness is imbued in the structure of matter. And that's really the fundamental basis, I think, of the book.
A very important basis, as far as I'm concerned. We need to get to a number of things that would actually take much longer than we ever had. But, so I'm going to be pushing real hard. So I want to take our break right now, producer. Is that okay? So we can award a copy of this book. And when we return, the best friend at my wedding with Zahara and I was Christopher Bird.
Oh, yeah.
And we just had the most wonderful times with him and Peter Tompkins, and of course Puharich sometimes, and then some, and a whole group of other individuals. But he also introduced me to the Royal Rife microscope, which we thought was just extraordinary, and we didn't think there would be any problem for it getting recognition and being used. Well, of course, I was wrong. But when we come back, would you please talk to us a little bit about Royal Rife and his microscope and its possible assistance with cancer? Our guest is Dr. Marc Seifer, Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension. We need to get to those too. Published by our dear friends at Inner Traditions. MarcSeifer.com.
Hello, this is Uri Geller, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Our guest, of course, is Dr. Marc Seifer. The book is Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension, published by Inner Traditions. And go to marcseifer.com or 21stcenturyradio.com. But make sure you get at least one copy of this book. And you'll like it even more than I do. Mark, I noted, of course, the best friend of our friend Chris, our wedding, that is Chris Bird, who we had such a wonderful time with for about 20 years. he introduced us to the work of the Royal Rife microscope. Why do you believe it is a possible cure for cancer?
Because, first of all, my book does discuss how matter is constructed, and molecules are held together by sharing photons, light particles. In other words, we are held together by light. That's very important to understanding why Rife's experiments and work is so important. What Rife was trying to do, he was trying to look at viruses without killing them. When we were in science, in ninth grade or whatever, you'd look in a microscope, they would stain cells to look at them. So in order to look at a virus with an electron microscope, you have to kill it. And he felt you're losing a lot because you're looking at a dead organism. So he wanted to look at a living organism. So he had worked with Zeiss Optics, and he had created a microscope that had, I think, 6,000 parts to it. And with that, he could magnify 60,000 times. But in order to focus on this very, very small virus, he had to bombard the virus with different frequencies of light to find the resonant frequency of the virus. And different viruses would have different resonant frequencies. I think a lot of your listeners probably remember the Memorex commercial and Ella Fitzgerald. When she would hit the right vibration, the wine glass would break apart. So when she hits the resonant frequency, she's in tune with that, and then it starts to vibrate a lot, and then it breaks apart. Well, the same principle he's using. He's bombarding the viruses with light to try and look at them. So when he hits the resonant frequency, the viruses start to illuminate, and he could look at them. And then he had an epiphany. He realized if I continued to bombard the virus with that same frequency, I will break apart the bonds that are holding the virus together, which is the cure for cancer. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely fundamental. There is, and my argument is that I'm right by Brown University. 5 or 6 major universities. Let them build the microscope. Let them do experiments with mice, etc. But we really should be doing these experiments because I can't see anything wrong with it. To me, it seems fundamental. It seems like it has to be the cure. One of the cures for cancer.
Well, poor Royal Rife went through holy hell.
I know he did.
And as did so many, the struggle just even with chiropractic medicine up until about 1988 when they were attempting to destroy it for the 15th time. Finally, the Supreme Court in Chicago certainly helped out. But this is really important. I'd like to know more. My relative, Dr. Galen Hieronimus, worked on machines like that, similar to it. And that was one of the reasons why when Chris told me about it, I really wanted to know more about it. Thank you. And thank you for making it a part of this book. Now, of course, the book is called Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension. The fifth 5-dimension universe. What is that fifth dimension?
It's inner space. So, Einstein's got 3 physical dimensions, height, width, and depth, and time. So we live in a 4-dimensional world. But what about inner space? What about the mind? Rudolf Steiner had a great idea. He called it counter space. So as you can go outside into infinity, you can also go into your mind into infinity. I've always believed that. And now that we have the Internet, it's the same concept. Mm-hmm. You go from one hyperlink to the next, to the next, to the next. You go into one infinite virtual space, on and on. And so that's basically the idea. It's a very simple idea, but just as there is outer space, there's inner space.
Yeah. Now we get to, I just love this area on ether. You have so much important information here, but what is ether, and why was it forgotten by modern-day scientists?
This was a long learning process for me, and once I figured it out, I think it's very simple to understand, but it took me, I'd say, 10 or 15 years before I pieced this whole thing together. It really started with Tesla. Tesla was the subject of my doctoral dissertation, and Stanley Krippner, as you mentioned, was my mentor as well. He is an unbelievable, amazing, amazing man, because my doctoral dissertation was 700 pages, and he read the whole thing, and he ripped it apart like you know how he does, but he made it into much better work. And then it became the biography Wizard, which was doing really well. And out of the tons and tons of things that I read on Tesla, I read one sentence from one interview. That's how much he hid this aspect of his work. It was to Joseph Alsop, who was a New York Times reporter, very famous reporter, ALSOP. And in the interview, Tesla told him, he said, the sun is absorbing more energy than it's radiating. Now, that sounded ridiculous to me because the sun is very hot. How could it absorb more energy than it's radiating? It took me a few years, and I stuck it in Wizard. But I started to think about it, and I thought, well, if Tesla said it's so, let's assume that it is so. And then it began to dawn on me, of course it's so. Otherwise, the sun would burn out. It probably is absorbing more energy than it's radiating. And so that got me to rethink the ether, and I started to do a lot of research on the ether. And a lot of the chapter on the ether is just traditional study of the ether. Everyone believed in the ether in the 1800s, including Fitzgerald and Lorentz, and even Einstein believed in the ether. But what happened was Einstein was looking at light as operating as a wave or as a particle. So when Michelson and Morley tried to measure the ether in the late 1800s using mirrors, they were unable to detect the ether. So what Einstein said was, if light operates like a particle, it's going to travel from the sun to the earth like little bullets. It doesn't have to operate like a wave. But he had a whole discussion with Lorentz. And Lorentz said, wait a second, the ether exists. And Einstein says, I know it exists. But what happened when he wrote his theory of relativity in 1905, he emphasized the particle aspect of the light, the photons. So literally the entire 20th century has evolved with the idea that space is empty, that there's nothing in space. It's all empty, and that light travels like particles, even though Einstein lectured at Leiden University on the ether, which is in the 1920s. So the first major biography of Einstein, written by Roland Clark in 1970, doesn't even mention the ether, doesn't even mention Einstein's, it mentions the ether, but doesn't mention that he lectured on it. So the upshot of it is, let's assume that the ether exists and that light operates like a wave. Now, one of the things Einstein wanted to do was he wanted to combine gravity with electromagnetism. We talked about the sacred number 4. Physicists have 4 forces to the universe. Strong nuclear force holds the nucleus together. Weak nuclear force holds the neutrons together. Electromagnetism holds molecules together, and gravity holds the stars and the planets together. So those are the 4 forces. He could combine 3 of them. The physicists today have combined 3 of them, but they've been unable to combine gravity with the other 3 forces. They can't combine gravity with electromagnetism. I do it in this book. It's very simple. And here's how you do it. When you start to do research on the ether, remember Tesla said that the sun is absorbing more energy than it's radiating. This is actually the theory of gravity. What really is gravity? And the theory is actually very simple. The idea is that all matter, all electrons and protons, these little spinning particles, are absorbing ether all of the time. Mass absorbs ether all the time. That's what gives them electron spin. So when you jump up, the reason you land back on the Earth is not because of some magical force called gravity. You're in the way of the influx. The Earth is absorbing energy all the time. All of matter is absorbing all the time, and those electrons and protons are spinning. And as I explained in the book, they're actually spinning at 1.37 times the speed of light. They're spinning faster than the speed of light. In other words, they violate relativity. And they are converting that spin into electromagnetism. So the theory is very simple, that what gravity is, it's the absorption of ether by the mass of, let's say, the Earth. And during the absorption process, the electrons and the protons are spinning, and they're converting that energy into electromagnetism, into the force that's holding the molecules together. So that's what Einstein was trying to do. He was trying to combine gravity with electromagnetism. I just did it in 2 or 3 minutes. And the reason why he couldn't do it was because he had to abandon aspects of his theory of relativity. He was saying nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. But when you go into the history of quantum physics, I read George Gamo's book. Gamo is, like Einstein, one of the forefathers, the founding fathers of quantum physics. He said that in the 1920s, Goudsmit and Uhlenbeck measured electron spin, and they found that it was spinning at 1.37 times the speed of light. It was violating relativity, he said, but it wasn't violating anything in quantum mechanics. So what Dirac did was he said, let's not call it 1.37 times the speed of light. Let's call it the square root of -1. Let's make it an imaginary number. And once he made an imaginary number, he was able to combine Einstein's theory with quantum mechanics, and he got a Nobel Prize. But what we lost was the very fact that electrons are spinning faster than the speed of light. So what I think is that electrons are absorbing energy. This is the zero-point energy that people like Tom Bearden talk about. It's the ether. The ether is vibrating in a rate faster than the speed of light, and it's being transformed by matter into what's called the physical universe.
Oh, boy, well done. Boy, I don't know how you could do that, and so it would take me an hour and a half. But, of course, I can't remember everything you've taught me, so that's one of the problems I have there. But I really learned a lot from this book in regards to Einstein and his problems in his particular area. So, but ether is linked then to the speed of light?
Yes, the idea is that the ether is living in a realm, that there is a realm a tachyonic realm faster than the speed of light. And the proof is Goudsmit and Uhlenbeck, who were two famous scientists, measured the spin of an electron, and it's 1.37 times the speed of light. So there's something spinning. All of matter is spinning faster than the speed of light, but this thing has been lost because Dirac got a Nobel Prize by converting it into an imaginary number. So what the ether is, I read an amazing article, which is supposedly written by Tesla, but I don't believe it was. But what this article said was that the ether slows down light particles to the speed of light. In other words, there's a primary energy that's existing at a much more rapid rate than 186,000 miles a second. Mm-hmm. And that is the zero-point energy realm, which is very hard for us to detect, but it's the it's underneath the physical matter. And so it's a tachyonic realm. And in the book, I'm arguing that our mind is operating in the same realm, that we're actually in this tachyonic realm.
Also, the cosmic rays, there's evidence to support that they move much faster than the speed of light. How much faster?
Well, Tesla said they were 50 times, but faster than the speed of light, cosmic rays. But what I'm arguing for traditional physicists, if any traditional physicists are listening, is to go back to Gamo's book and look up Goudsmit and Uhlenbeck and tell me why electrons are spinning 1.37 times the speed of light. How come you guys for the last 75 years have ignored this? They talk about the God particle. They just built a multi-billion-dollar super collider in Bern, Switzerland, and I don't believe they're going to find it because they're looking for something that's traveling faster than the speed of light. And what they're doing is they're colliding. They're smashing one atom into another atom or one particle into another. They're trying to find the secrets of the universe by smashing things up.
Well, we're smashing things up right now by having to stop you right here. There's some really important stuff here, guys, especially when your comments concerning why the mainstream scientific community is unwilling to challenge Einstein. We'll be back with Dr. Marc Seifer, Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension Inner Traditions, marcseifer.com. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm the alleged Dr. Bob Hieronimus, a lowly PhD hanging out in this part of the universe, and there are times when I don't know which part I'm in. That's all there is to it, friends. And, of course, our executive producer and research assistant for about almost 2 decades now. Of course, our show's about 21 years old, is Laura Corden. Our engineer is Jake Bryant. And you're listening to a group that I used to love listening to for years, the Supreme Angels. The Supreme Angels. There they go. Of course, our guest is Dr. Marc Seifer, Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension Inner Traditions, marcseifer.com. That's spelled M-A-R-C, Seifer.com. Yes, my boss told me not to spell it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And, of course, we have just about 15 to 20 minutes to talk about some very important stuff. And I'd like to start with the link between ether, gravity, and electromagnetism.
Okay, so basically what I was saying is very simple. What ether is the medium between all the stars, and that the stars and the Earth, planets, they're absorbing ether all of the time. The reason that they're absorbing ether, I think, is to keep the elementary particles spinning. So electrons, we know that they spin. What keeps them spinning? I'm guessing that, and I have I cite the sources obviously in the book, that they are absorbing ether all of the time and converting that ether into electromagnetism. So what we call gravity, really from the etheric point of view, is the absorption of ether by the elementary particles of the Earth. So that's really it.
Well, we talked a little bit about Einstein last segment, and you make the point that, why might Einstein's theories be incomplete and perhaps built on some flawed data, but combining that with, actually, I should have said, why is mainstream scientific community unwilling to take on Einstein in this particular area?
There's a few reasons. Einstein obviously was a genius, but Einstein himself, and I go into great depth. I mean, I've studied Einstein's work, and I've studied the biographies and a lot of what he said. One of the things that Einstein said, which is in Roland Clark's biography of Einstein, Einstein said that if the ether can be detected, then his theory of relativity is wrong. Now, when you read what the etheric view of gravity is, it's what a G-force is. It's actually very easy to detect the ether. If you're in a car and you stop short, you feel the force of that movement, you're absorbing ether. And so there's a link between acceleration and gravity, which Einstein, in fact, did recognize. But where Einstein set himself up was, he said nothing could travel faster than the speed of light. But they were measuring electron spin, and they were finding that electrons were indeed spinning faster than the speed of light. So what were they going to do? They didn't want to take Einstein on, so they changed that spin to the square root of -1, and Dirac did this, and he combined Einstein's theory of relativity with quantum mechanics, and he got a Nobel Prize. So they've got this whole this whole system giving a Nobel Prize to a guy for combining Einstein's theory with quantum mechanics, but the loss was the fact that someone had measured electron spin. It was traveling faster than the speed of light. Here's where Ouspensky comes in. What Ouspensky says is that what Einstein had come across was actually a new dimension. And so one of the things I discuss is how you get from one dimension to the next dimension. And it's actually very simple. If a dot is the zero dimension and a dot moves out, just moves out, it becomes a line. So a line is the first dimension. If a line moves perpendicular to itself, it creates a plane. That's the second dimension. So you have this concept of movement and at right angles. If the plane moves up at right angles, it creates a cube, which is the third dimension. And if a cube is moving through space, that's time. But you can draw a hypercube, which is a cube extending itself out. And so a hypercube, so there's actually two different dimensions which you could look at. One is time, the physical cube or the Earth moving through space, and another is that the space itself extending into what I'm calling inner space, which is, the fifth dimension. So what Einstein came across, he said nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. What Ouspensky is saying is, of course something can travel faster than the speed of light. What Einstein came across was another dimension. And so that other dimension is the mental realm. One of the things I talk about in the book is the very equation E equals mc squared. What about c squared? What the heck is c squared? And I discuss from the best of my ability an attempt to try and explain what c squared is. It came from Leibniz's equation for force. F equals mv squared. Force equals mass times velocity squared. And so I make a simple argument. If force equals mass times velocity squared, if velocity squared has a physical counterpart, then if E equals mc squared, then c squared's got to have a physical counterpart as well. And it's square to the physical dimension. So that's another way of looking at what the next dimension is. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say, let's accept what Einstein's saying, but let's realize that he's setting the stage for letting us understand that there is another dimension, and the threshold is the speed of light. And my argument is that our mind is already operating in a realm faster than the speed of light all the time.
Let's return to gravity just a second here. Gravity is, you say on page 107, universal compression of ether. Could you elaborate on this for me, please?
Yeah, what I did was I think I have some contradictions in the book, and I think that's a contradiction to what I was saying. And I put it in because that's what I had read that, and I see that as a contradiction to what I'm trying to argue. I don't totally understand what that means. But how I understand what gravity is, according to the etheric view, is that it's absorbing ether all the time, so that all of matter is sucking ether in, is an influx all the time. So when you jump up, you're in the way of this influx, you fall back down. Now, that universal compression came from Tesla's work, and I put it in for historical reasons. There might be someone that could understand it, but I didn't want to leave it out because he used that concept. But I didn't. Honestly, I don't understand it. What I do understand is the other way of looking at ether.
Well, thank you for explaining that, because I was a little confused. Dark matter or dark energy. There are books and upon books coming out on this now. How might it be related to ether?
Here's what I think. There's a few things I wanted to say about that. I wrote an article in 1979 called "The Universe is a Hologram." To me, it's self-evident, and a lot of what I'm saying I think is self-evident, like the Royal Rife stuff. Let's say you take a Hubble telescope and put it on, it's circling the Earth, and you get a map of the universe. Suppose you move that Hubble telescope to circle the planet Jupiter. You'll get a map of the universe. You could put the Hubble telescope any place in the universe, and you will get a map of the whole universe. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so every point in space contains the intersecting light from every star. Wherever you go, you're going to see millions and millions and millions of stars. So that's a holographic model for the universe. So the universe is set up on a holographic model, and at every point in space you have the intersecting light from every star. That, to me, is self-evident. Now, what is dark matter? I think what happened is it's semantics. They meant the term dark meant you couldn't see it. We can't see space. We can't. If I look out from here to the sun, I don't see the space in between the sun. I don't see the air. We don't call air dark. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. They made a mistake. They called it dark matter. It's like saying dark air because you can't see it. They should have said invisible matter. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so my argument is that what dark matter really is light. It's light energy. Mm-hmm. And that the universe is filled with light. You can't go any place in the universe and not be at a point where you have the intersecting light from every star in the universe. I think it's self-evident. So what I'm saying dark matter is it's really light energy. And another thing I'm saying is that Planck's constant is a little quantum of energy. I'm saying that photons have mass. So they're saying, well, the missing matter. Yeah, all the photons that have been produced for 14 billion years, that's spreading out all over the universe, has a teeny bit of weight to it. And that's what the missing energy is. So it's a semantic problem. They should have called it light energy instead of dark energy. They meant invisible energy. So what I think it is, it's simply light.
Well, how might, Tesla, an extraordinary soul, you mentioned one of the earlier theories, or some people feeling that he came from another planet. But how might have Tesla developed supersensitive abilities?
I think that this is an interesting idea, this concept of an avatar and revelation. I believe that there are higher states of consciousness, and as you stated in the beginning of your show, we're not alone. We cannot be the smartest thing in the universe. There has to be other intelligences more intelligent than us, and we are, in a sense, instruments of higher intelligent forces. What Gurdjieff talks about it. What's the point of humans? And one of the points is to help the cosmos evolve. So certain people do things, and they are actually instruments of a higher purpose. I think Kubrick, when he made 2001 with Arthur Clarke, it served a higher purpose. I also think Spielberg, he doesn't realize it, but E.T. is a revelation. It's like a biblical tale. It's energy from a higher state. And there are certain people, I'd put Edison right up there with Tesla, but these people come to the earth and they are instruments of higher powers. What Tesla saw himself, which is so interesting, he didn't see himself as an inventor. He saw himself as a discoverer. And I'll give you an example. We could have never invented the airplane if birds didn't fly. All of our inventions come from studying nature, studying a higher conscious force, which is the producer of life. So some people are more in touch with expressing this higher process, and sometimes it can be through artistic achievement, and in Tesla's case, it was through creative invention. So that's really the idea. So the idea of him being, coming from another planet, I think in some spiritual sense, in a way, he was. He was tapped into this higher energy, and he was expressing it on the earth, and we needed him at that time.
Well, it's too bad that some of the most important work has not been followed through, and so much of his work has been destroyed as well. But that seems to be the way of the status quo. And boy, we heard, I couldn't believe what we heard just before the end of last hour, saying that something was wrong with the status quo, or let's not follow that. I've forgotten exactly what it was years ago. I don't think I'd ever would have heard that on the radio. How might a person's mind be a microcosm of the universe?
Well, I think that what is consciousness? I like the idea of the mandala. And when Moses, sees the burning bush, which is God, God tells Moses his name, I am that I am. So the name of God is I am. And from Rudolf Steiner's work, he gets into the very word I. I can say, you did this, or Bob did that, or this fellow did that, or that guy did that, but I can't say I for you. I could say Bob did this, or you did this, but I can't say I did this, meaning it's you. So I is a very special word, but I gives you an identity with the great I am in the sky. We're all linked to the Godhead, to the I am. So I like the model of a mandala with God in the center, the big I am in the center, and we're all spokes off the wheel. So when they ask Jesus, are you the Son of God? He says, I am. As we all are. We are all sons or daughters of God. We're all chips off the old block. So I think my consciousness and your consciousness, everybody's consciousness, is a little piece of the giant consciousness. We each have our own, what Leibniz called the monad. And so that, I think, is the link, why we're a microcosm of the macrocosm, meaning the conscious force that created all this. We each have a little chip of that.
Well, also there's there's so many other sections in this book we haven't touched, but would you please, for our final question, discuss Darwin's theory of random mutation versus the Aristotelian view that the universe is purposeful? What does the word teleology mean?
Well, Darwin said that life evolved through chance mutation and survival of the fittest. So the giraffe with the longer necks survive, and the ones with the shorter necks die out. In the case of the cheetah, the slow cheetahs die out, and the fast ones survive. But it's all based on chance. What Darwin is missing is the elan vital, is the vital life force inside that forces this giraffe to want to have a longer neck, or the cheetah to run faster. The word teleology means that the end is implied in the beginning, and Aristotle talks about this. So if we have an acorn, already inside that acorn is a 40-foot oak tree at some point in the future. It's already built into the acorn. And so what Darwin is missing is that built inside of every one of us is a plan for the distant future. So evolution, what Gurdjieff would be called, he's calling it involution, that there's help from above. So it's not just Darwin's theory that we are becoming more and more complex, trying to adapt to the environment, but there's also help from above. There's an inner force propelling us forward, and that's what's missing from Darwin's theory, the inner force, the directionality, first cause, the conscious force that created it all.
Well, Mark, is there anything that we haven't covered? There's a lot we haven't covered, but that you would like to relate in the few minutes we have left?
I would like to say that that I end the book, with a lot of discussion of astrology. I do Bill Clinton's chart. I have Einstein's chart, Adolf Hitler's chart, and Freud's chart. And one of the things I'm making an argument for is if Johann Kepler, if Isaac Newton, if Galileo, Copernicus, if all these great people studied astrology, why are we so arrogant to think that they were brilliant in this one realm, but they were dumb in this other realm? Maybe there really is something to astrology. And I talk about Gauquelin's book, Cosmic Clocks, where he did 20,000 horoscopes, and he found out that there is a link between Mars and warriors and Jupiter and politicians and all of this, that there's something there. But what is he really saying? We are a product of the solar system, and that solar system is imbued in us. Anybody with a telescope, that's what I would like to tell your listeners, is if they've never seen Saturn through a telescope or Jupiter with a telescope, you have to do this. You just have to do this. And you'll see how close they really are. You can see the moons of Jupiter. You can see the ring of Saturn, and it's so close. I mean, so it is all influencing us. So I would like to make a case that we should rethink about astrology in the sense that we are a product of this conscious universe, and there are some big secrets there, and we had some great giants that studied it in our past, and we should be respectful of them.
Well, I agree, especially Mr. Gauquelin, and some of the tragic ends of so many individuals that discussed astrology, especially within I'm trying to. Did he commit suicide?
I don't know.
Was it Gauquelin?
I don't know, but look what they did to Nancy Reagan,
Oh, yes, indeed. But the reason why I especially felt poorly for the work of Gauquelin is because most of the people that tore it apart obviously didn't read his work, didn't understand his work.
Yeah.
And this happens so many times in so many areas that it seems like within academia sometimes there's a good deal of fear concerning things that they know very little about, but will attack.
I have a quote in the book. I have the guy's name, but I can't think of his name. But it was, "A wise man follows the stars. A fool is ruled by them." There is a tremendous amount of wisdom in that statement.
I agree. Well, thank you for joining us, Mark. The book is Transcending the Speed of Light, Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and the Fifth Dimension. You remember the Fifth Dimension as a group?
Yes, I love that song.
Weren't they something? Yeah. And
I'm an Aquarian. Too.
You're an Aquarian. No wonder you'd like that song. By the way, did you go to Woodstock?
Yes, I did.
Did you have a good time?
It was a mind-blowing experience.
I bet you it was.
A life-changing experience.
Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. I hope you can join us again sometime.
Thank you.
21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. And I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus. And remember to sit up straight.